And
So I go through it.
we're now live. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Chattering with Nicholas Vince. And this week I'm going to be chattering with Paul Hyatt. Say good evening, Paul.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be here, Nicholas.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Just before I start asking Paul some questions, there are a few things I wanted to share with you. And that is a reminder to everybody, there is now a Facebook group called Chattering with Nicholas Vince. So to learn more about the show, to discuss future guests, etc., and kind of work on the community, that's on the Facebook group, Chattering with Nicholas Vince. That's set up. It's a private group, so you can apply to join, and then Don or myself will invite you to come and join the group. Just a reminder that the video that I created, EXGF's We Are the Hearts, is still there, and wanting some more views, please check out my YouTube channel for that. Next week's guest is going to be the composer Lito Velasco, who composed the music to the Hellraiser documentary Leviathan, and has done some other stuff, other things as well. You can find all that on the Facebook page, etc. I'm really looking forward. He's a very charming young gentleman, and it should be good fun. So please come and join me for that one next week if you're around. And most importantly, Howl, which I'm going to be talking to Paul about in just a few moments, is going to be on a limited release in the UK in cinemas from the 16th of October. There's also a special screening at the Prince Charles Cinema, Leicester Square, London, on the 18th of October. Paul will be there doing a Q&A, and there will also be members of the cast there. I do recommend this movie. I do recommend going and seeing it and getting, grabbing an opportunity to speak to Paul, particularly if you don't have a chance to speak to him this evening. But yeah, and then that's limited release. And then on the 26th of October, Howl will be released on DVD. Right, okay, cool. So that's all my introduction done. So Paul, before we start talking about Howl and the Seasoning House and so on, I wanted to talk a little bit about makeup, how you got into making makeup, and what was the first makeup, if you can remember, what was the first makeup you ever applied?
First makeup I ever applied. Well, firstly, I got into makeup through having a misspent childhood, probably like most of the people watching this, where, I spent my whole childhood from probably about the age of, I don't know, 11, watching as many horror movies as I could. And it was especially around in my late teens that I thought, I was addicted to Carpenter movies. I loved Carpenter movies. But also there's all the stuff like, RoboCop and Total Recall, which, the Nightmare on Elm Street, the Friday the 13th, which is all the slasher stuff. But also RoboCop and Total Recall were more sort of fantastical makeup. So although I'd say I was much more of a horror nut with all the sort of slashers, RoboCop and Total Recall was a lot more about the makeup designs and fantasy prosthetics. So there's a whole mix of an interest of the sculpture and the painting aspect. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So, I started sculpting and painting, and then I went to a makeup course. And then after that, it was just trying to work on as many low-budget movies, short films, whatever would let me work on them. And it took quite a few years. I was like this, I don't know, I think I was 17, and I was just, working from my bedroom, just trying to make all these prosthetics and, get whatever experience I could making movies. And I think the first makeup I applied would have been this little zombie film called iZombie. I think I just turned 18, and they said, it was something like, you got £1,000 to create all the makeup effects and the zombie effects and everything in this movie. And I thought, wow, that's loads of money, being so naive and working out my bedroom. So, yeah, I mean, I made all these prosthetics for it. And I look back now, and, they are a teenage quality working from your bedroom. But it got released, I think, 10 years after we made it. So I was like, people are like, oh, what's this film? Looking at, which 10 years later, I was cringing at these makeups, they were my first makeups. And people are like, oh, I saw that movie, iZombie. And it's like, yeah, I did when I was 18. Please don't judge me on that. I think it would have been a zombie makeup was my first one.
And you said that you were sculpting stuff and so on. You were working out of your bedroom. Now, I know a number of people. I've met a number of makeup artists who are doing exactly the same thing. I'm just working with a gentleman called Paul Weil on Rats. Is there a problem with fumes when you're casting this stuff? I mean, what materials were you using to create the zombie makeups back then?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think about it now, and my bedroom was probably a very, very dangerous place to be. I mean, I was mixing up plaster. I was cooking foam latex appliances in my dad's oven. It was a bit stinky. And I think it did get to a point. I mean, I did a lot in my house, and it was good when I first opened a tiny little one-room studio round the corner from where my dad lived, and he was because sometimes the oven will be being used for foam latex, and I'd be sort of using white spirit and scrubbing out mold. So it was good to finally move out and get my first little studio. And yeah, it was I couldn't imagine doing that. But when you're 17 years old, you don't really think about these things.
And you said you went to makeup course? Where did you study the makeup?
I went to grease paint makeup school in Eastfields,
right.
And I think I'd done that course. I think I was 17, so I'd done that course. I came straight out of that course and was given this movie to do, which for a 17-year-old is pretty cool to be straight out of makeup school. Okay, here's a zombie film. Here's £1,000, make all our effects. So I think about it. That's kind of quite lucky.
That sounds extraordinary. How many zombies did you actually have to do for iZombie?
As I remember, because I haven't seen the film for 20 years, there was 3 stages of his zombie progression, from little wounds to a full-on face piece with his hair missing and bits of skull coming through. Then there was a girl that got zombified, and then there was a whole bunch of gore makeups. So yeah, and it's one of those films where we kind of shot over a few months, a few days here, a few days there, a few days here. But I mean, there must have been about 5 different zombie makeups, chest rippings, neck rippings. I made a full body corpse as well. So yeah, it was quite a lot to think about it now for what I did as a kid.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you did iZombie, and you said you opened up your own little studio. What, when you were up 18, 19, you opened up your own little place?
Yeah, I think it's probably about 1920, because after iZombie, all the little jobs, the jobs got smaller. I was just doing lots of one bit here, one bit there, a neck piece here, a false nose there. So it all got a bit smaller. Then I got my little studio, but then I started working on a lot of other films for other people. I think one of the natural progressions is you should come out of makeup college, work for other people, and then start doing your own jobs. I kind of came out of college, done my own job, and then I started working for other people. And I learned a lot, from all the people that I was working for. And I still had my little studio. So when the job would come in, I would do my own little films from my studio and then work for other people. So, and that's what it was like for maybe about another 5-6 years. And then the studios got bigger and bigger. As the films got bigger, the studios got bigger. And I think there was one point where I had a 4,000 square foot workshop for about a year, which was too big. I'd just done Doomsday, and it was a huge, huge job. And then after that, I sort of scaled down to the 2,000 square foot workshop, which I gave up 3 years ago. So I've been, because obviously I don't really do prosthetics anymore. So it was lots of workshops, lots of different sizes, lots of up and downs, lots of working with other people, and yeah, it was interesting. 20 years.
What I found interesting, and I've always found interesting, when we were doing Hellraiser and Nightbreed, particularly, you had all these young people creating stuff. It seems to me that it actually involves quite a lot of different skills. I suppose sculpting is the main skill that you need, but you've got to be able to paint the finished pieces as well. Is that right? Is what would you say is the primary skill for a makeup, a special effects makeup artist?
If you're working for other people in the studio, then it's sculpting, painting. Then those are two things that if someone came to my workshop, straight away look at their sculpting, look at their painting, and look at their application. And then when you start doing your own job, it's a whole different ball game. It's about what you're like as a person. It's about being able to head a team, budgeting, scheduling. As the jobs got bigger, the amount of sculpting and painting I do would drop dramatically, to the point where there were some jobs where 90% of my job was meetings, budgets, schedules, designing, and that's as a designer. But for the first 10 years, it was all about sculpting, painting, application, and also working within a team. You can get brilliant sculptors that can't work in a team, or that they come in and they're a bit of a dick and they don't get work within the team, and they tend not to last long. So yeah, I mean, sculpting and painting really are your two primary skills that you need to make it. If you can't sculpt or paint, then your only skill really is, I don't know, just
gluing it on, really.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And so you did Eyes of a Zombie. What do you think were possibly your most challenging job? And it's a long career. You've done an awful lot of these things, but which one do you think was probably the biggest challenge in terms of the makeup?
I think it was the film that kind of really pushed my career up a notch, which was The Descent. Basically, I went into pitch for that job, and a lot of it was the fact that I wanted to bring silicone prosthetics into it. Silicone at the point of The Descent, not many people use silicone. Some people used it for a makeup here and there, but I was essentially saying, let's bring in full silicone makeups across the board, 50 applications of creatures, and Descent. It was a half decent budget, but it wasn't huge amount of my budget. And I think what was hard about that is if I had just done prosthetics, it would have been kind of hard enough. But I had to do all the creature prosthetics. I had to do all the dead animals. We made all the stunt weapons. We made 1,000 bones, skulls. We had all the human corpses to make. We had animatronic and mechanical heads to make. Loads of dead animals to make. And then, as well as running, a team doing all the prosthetic application of about 50 prosthetic applications of creatures. So it was a huge challenge, because at the time I was like, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we'll bring that in. Yeah, we'll make that for you. And it kind of, do all this. I had, we were at Pinewood. I had one department that was just making bones for 8 weeks. I had one department that was making animals. And we were doing prosthetic application. So I think with The Descent, not only were we trying to do everything in silicone, which was a nightmare to run those pieces, because with foam latex, everyone knows how they're made. Just shove the foam in the mold, close it, stick it in the oven. 2 hours later, you've got a foam piece. With the silicone at that time, it was really difficult. It was like making sure you sculpt it in the right material, that it's thick enough that it will come out of a mold, because it's sort of like gel filled. If you put too much, if you get the concentrations wrong of the different gels, it will come out like goo, like jelly. So you have to make sure the encapsulate of the silicone was right. So it's at that time, running silicone pieces was really difficult compared to foam. It's much easier now, but I think having all of those things to do on The Descent just made a difficult job, and being in the winter in Pinewood. So we'd have these naked guys in all their makeup, because the makeups were essentially a face piece, ear pieces, a little back piece, something covering their genitals. The rest of it was paint job and veining, and so they were essentially naked. So when you took them from the makeup room to the studio, they'd be ice cold. So we'd have to wrap them in these sort of like silver, the silver running, that runners use.
Yeah.
We wrapped them up. So by the time you got them to the studio, some of the paint was coming off, so you'd have to quickly repaint them, and then you put KY jelly on them, and that made them really cold. So you're always trying to keep them warm. You'd put on you know, a dressing robe, and that would sort of stick to the KY jelly. So those makeups were very, very time consuming and high maintenance. So that was by far the challenging job, but the most rewarding in terms of what it did for my career.
It's absolutely fascinating, and of course it takes me right back to Pinewood and doing Nightbreed and remembering, just because people don't understand, those studios are not heated. They're just big, massive empty spaces. So you were filming Descent on a big soundstage at Pinewood?
I don't know. It wasn't the big sound. I don't think it was a big sound stage. To be honest with you, I can't remember. We had 3 stages,
Right.
all filled with the caves, and I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I mean, we had. I mean, one day that was a difficult day is the scene with Shauna where she's attacked by the female creature in the blood pool.
Uh-huh.
That blood pool, the red stained everything, and you know, I think the female creatures we did in foam just because they had to have their whole chest covered. So it didn't make sense. You couldn't really do it with a silicone chest piece, so you do it with foam. So those were kind of easier that they were all foam, but put them under water with whatever was in that water. People always say, oh, it's really nice and heated and tested. It's like, no, it's just pink water. And yeah, people always have an idea that everything's going to be warm and the water's all going to be perfect temperature and the studios are heated, and you know, no, not at all. I mean, at the green room, I mean, those creatures destroyed the green room. We had a green room, and KY jelly was everywhere. KY jelly, dirt, blood. I mean, I don't know how much they got fined, but I just remember coming in, and there was plastic put on the floor, and I think production had done what they could to cover everything. And then you had about 8 creatures, you know, eating and drinking, and you know, sitting on the, you know, covered in dirt and blood and KY jelly and all these lovely fabric sofas covered in cooler juice, and oh, it was yeah, it's probably quite different to how people imagine it's going to
I'm curious now, because we were discussing earlier on about Hellraiser and the fact that there was a lot of KY jelly used in Hellraiser. It sounds as if you used industrial amounts of KY jelly. Is this orderable in bulk KY jelly, or?
We started off KY like just buying tons of KY jelly, and there's been a lot of jobs where I've sent people out to go and buy KY jelly from Boots, just go buy everything they have.
Yeah.
But then we got one of our suppliers. He was making blood, and he said, I can make this for you," and he came out and made some edible KY jelly and some normal KY jelly, the normal one to put in their bodies, and the edible one that we could put in their mouth that they could sort of squirt it out. So it went from buying every tube of KY jelly in London to by having it specially made. So yeah, it's always embarrassing for the young trainee to go out and buy 10, 20 tubes of KY jelly, because yeah, they do get looks.
Yeah, no, and I remember when we were doing the Chatterer, the idea of edible KY jelly, I love that idea, because I remember when I was wearing the Chatterer mask. Of course, they just used to get a tube of KY jelly and put it into my mouth. Well, the mouth of the Chatterer. It was on the plastic teeth in front. Every so often it went into my mouth as well, and it's not stuff that you want in your mouth, really. Okay.
I mean, KY jelly, blood, all the stuff that actors have to put up with, because it always finds a way into your suit, into your face prosthetic, into your mask. If it's in a mask, you know, you see crazy things happen. You know, we never did it, but I heard about people super gluing things onto masks and the fumes, and you think, oh my god, you know, it's blood. You squirt on, it goes down the mask, and KY. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you do because you love your art.
Yeah, yes, yeah. You may have heard on Hellraiser they used to super glue condoms to the mask around my mouth. I cannot stand the smell of super glue. It brings it. It's like Madeline's in the novel. just brings me straight back to that smell. And of course, the fumes go up into your face and your eyes and so on. It's just horrible stuff. But as I was talking to Jeff Portis the other day about it, he was saying, you know, we were young. They were really, really young when they were doing this. You know, most of them hadn't done a lot of stuff before then. It was a little like you working, although I'm sure you weren't super gluing people in iZombie, but it was that kind of level. It was early jobs when they were doing Hellraiser. So
yeah, you don't know. I mean, you know, you're young, and you know, but you don't do anything to an actor you wouldn't have done yourself. You know, to yourself. You know, it's that whole thing of using super glue. I'm sure the person testing it would have tested it on himself probably first and gone, yeah, it's fine. You know, it's
and they weren't super gluing to my skin. It was, you know, they were super gluing it to, you know, the mask. And it was going to be the only way to actually keep the, you know, the plastic teeth and the foam of the mask together to actually create the gums for the Chatterer. That's what they were using it for. And I can't imagine how on earth they could do it otherwise. I've got a couple of questions here. There's one from Damon, which I'm going to come back to, and hopefully Damon may be able to join us later on. A lady called, and I'd like to move off the Descent, and we'll start talking about the Seasoning House. And this question comes from a lovely actress I know called Kate Davies. I'm a huge fan of the Seasoning House. I'd love to know where the idea for the movie came from.
Thank you, Katie. Basically, it came from I was talking to a friend of mine who's one of the writers on it, and she actually had the idea for a kind of documentary, a sort of docudrama about the Balkan sex trafficking trade. And she told me these stories about young girls that were kept in a house, you know, and there'd be one that was a kind of slave that would look after the other girls. And I thought, what a great idea for a film. And her idea was to make something heart-wrenching, but more of a sort of documentary. And I thought, you know something, we can make it into a documentary, but my feeling was, let's make it into a gut-wrenching sort of horror thriller. That because I thought, number one, there's kind of a message there that you want to tell people about what's going on in the world and what these girls have to go through. But you know, you should to get to a wider audience. You know, let's make it into a film. Let's make it into a roller coaster. You know, sort of, you know, journey into that hellish world, but make it thrilling. And I don't think she kind of liked the idea, but we did a passing script, so she liked the. And so basically, myself and my writing partner, Conal Palmer, we sat there. We wrote the script from literally that premise. We wrote the whole script in about 2 weeks. But you know, I did a lot of research into the subject, and you know, there's lots of instances where, you know, girls have escaped, and they talk about what happened. A lot of time, the girls that are captured, you know, some are put into the sort of prostitute roles. So others are kept purely to look after those girls that are, you know, continually raped and cleaned up, and so kind of everything in there was kind of fact based. And there are stories about there's a true story about a deaf girl that was kept in a brothel to look after the other girls. So everything there was kind of true to life. It's not based on one particular story, but it was an amalgamation of all what I was able to, you know, look at the sort of documentary footage, the stories, the survivor stories, and then we sort of amalgamated horror thriller. But you know, my thing was, I always wanted to make a tasteful film, that it wasn't exploitive, that it wasn't titillating, that it wasn't, because you're always aware that there are girls still suffering in those places, and I think to make something too trashy and exploitive, kind of, you know, I think it's tasteless. So it was trying to, you know, really walk on that balance of telling a story about what these girls go through, making it into a sort of entertaining, if you like, sort of thriller, but being respectful of what people can go through in those places.
And this was so when you're discussing the idea, you're working with Colm, your writing partner, was it always the intention that you would direct the movie?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as I sort of heard the premise, because the original idea came from a friend, Helen. She's a writer on it. She's kind of got a story credit because she came up with that promise. As soon as she said that to me, I was like, "Oh my god, this is the film that I've been looking for to develop into my own script." I was thinking about for ages, what can I do as my first movie, and when she talked about that premise, I was like, this could be an amazing movie and one for me to do. So yeah, it was always my intention to direct it.
Right. And okay, this is your first time. I mean, obviously you've been around. You've been involved with dozens of movies by this stage, but this is your first time directing. Did you go out and read a book? Did you talk to other directors, or did you just think, right, I know how to do this because I've been watching directors doing this for such a long time?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is that I've worked so closely to directors. I've worked on, I don't know, 70 odd films. So I've always been involved in everything from the storyboarding to sort of development. Then I'd sort of, we've always been effect sequences, how they work within the script. And I'd always be talking to directors for hours and hours and planning how we're going to shoot stuff and working with DPs, and then I'd work with costume to work out what they needed, working with makeup to see what they wanted, working within art departments to find out what they needed. And also being on the makeup bus, I spent so much of my time with actors. We talk about, some would say, oh, I just wish this director would say this to me, or give me this, or give me that. And I took all of that in. I'd see some actors saying things like, I don't mind what a director says to me, I just want them to have a vision and tell me what they want. Even if it's wrong, even if I don't agree with it, I need something. And then there'd be other directors that work with that would be brilliant with actors, great at putting together sequences. So it was kind of like, those 20 years was, I think, as good as any kind of film education you can have, because I was in the deep end sometimes, but I was sitting and seeing it from, what the director was doing with the actors, what they were doing with the stunt guys, what they were doing. I'd work with the VFX, I would come in. So there's so much working within a team that there's nothing really that was a mystery to me. There was nothing that I didn't think I'd be able to come on set, talk to my actors, work stuff out, and I wasn't nervous at all. I should have been, but I think you get so busy with planning it out and what you're going to do and how you're going to do it that a lot of people got that education from doing short films. Some people do 5, 10, 15 short films, then they do their own feature, which is a totally valid and logical way of doing it. But I kind of felt my work on 70 films odd kind of was my own education, and everything I kept thinking about was feature length. So I just, for me, it didn't feel like short films were the way to go, just because I didn't think I would gain anything by doing them that I didn't know from working on my own films. And if I hadn't had my prosthetics experience for 20 years, my journey in would have been to do loads of short films. So it was kind of, paired off for the other, really.
It's interesting. So what, again, with Seasoning House, and funnily enough, where did you film Seasoning House?
It was an old barrack. I think it's an RAF barracks it was just somewhere near Pinewood, and we found this old, it was like a children's hospital, but it was on a RAF base. I'm sure it's an RAF base. And they had houses there that used to be occupied by soldiers. So we had all these empty houses, and we found a little children's hospital. And it was the most lovely place. Lovely pastel colours, lovely children's drawings everywhere. It was beautiful. We said to them, do you mind if we, art department dress it so it looks a bit more? And they were like, yeah, sure, do whatever you want. And then they saw what we'd done. They were like, oh my God, this is horrible. Please put it back to what was. I think they thought we were just going to colour it different colours or just give it a bit of a spruce up. Like they didn't. I don't think they realised we were going to turn it into a Balkan rape house. So they were pretty good what we did. So yeah, and we were lucky to get that place. And we pretty much shot everything and trying to turn it into the Balkans. There's shots where we digitally put in sort of Balkan villages in the background and mountains. you know, strip that all away, and it was, you know, post office and an old block of flats, and you know, so there was a hell of a lot of work to try to, you know, give it, you know. I look at it now and I think, oh God, you know, we just about got away with it, but you know, there's so much more. We you know, if we'd had more budget, you know, we would have turned it more Balkan-like. But you know, we did what we could to try to make it look not like Pinewood.
Right. And we were talking about how cold it was at Pinewood. It strikes me that it looked very, very cold. I was watching the DVD earlier on today and the making of feature, and everyone just seemed to be huddled in large, thick parkas. You were filming it in winter, is that right?
We shot that in January. I think the 3 weeks in January and 1 week in February, so it was cold. There was one day where it was snowing, and I was like, oh my God, it's snowing. And like, we literally got to work, and there was this, halfway through shooting, there's a layer of snow everywhere. And I was like, this would have been a really cool film to shoot in the snow. And we were like, what's going to happen? Because we've got all of our forest scenes coming up. And, you know, we haven't, you know, there's been no snow. We've already shot some of the exteriors. And then the snow only lasted for 2 days. But yeah, it was cold, and those girls were cold. But it wasn't freezing. It wasn't like The Descent where it was freezing. I think it was actually kind of quite a lucky winter in that it didn't rain much. There was I don't remember one day where it rained. We just had the snow. But yeah, I mean, it was jacket weather. It was everyone wear jackets indoors kind of weather.
Right. And again, watching the movie, as I say earlier on today, how much were you using Steadicam a lot, or was it mostly handheld?
We used a lot of Steadicam. A lot of those scenes were actually originally shot in one camera movement. There's me going, oh, you know, something it'd be great to do this all in one shot. And I love unbroken takes. I like long Steadicam. I really went for it. I mean, there was 5-minute long sequences, but I always knew in my head, if this works in the cut, this is going to be great. If not, I will just cut it, and you know, so it's covered in a way that it could be one or the other. And then you get into the editing, and you've got to realise, although it might look, you know, poetically beautiful, audience watching it are going to be like, yeah, the story, you know. We followed her around for minutes on end, and it's one of those things. Until you're in the cut and you kind of get into the pacing of the movie, that I had to go, yeah, we need to cut that down, we need to cut that. But there's a Steadicam. I mean, my thoughts for the film was to have the first half dreamlike in a sort of opiate sort of vision, because the lead character, Rosie, plays Angel. The whole point is that she survives by being emotionally numb. So she's turned all of her feelings off. So she might as well be dead. So I saw it as there's a certain amount of loads of slow motion, you know, we suppressed the sound and muted it. So it kind of looked like either that was like the opiate version of what those girls were like in their drug-like haze, or Angel was dead and she was a ghost, because none of the other guys were touching her. She's walking through this house and all this horrible stuff was happening. But my fear is that, you know, they didn't look at her because she was, you know, the girl that was owned by the main guy. And so it's kind of like all those guys around, you know, don't see this little girl who's emotionally numb, who's dead. So she's kind of like a ghost. That was kind of like my sort of feeling about it. And her way of surviving was keeping emotionally numb. So when she then makes friends with this girl that could do sign language, and she stabs that guy, instantly the camera work changes. And from then on, the whole film was handheld. That was supposed to be signifying her being pulled into this, from this dark fairy tale, this deadness, into the real world. That was her being brought into the real world. And then it was non-stop handheld, because it was, okay, everything she did to survive, she's just totally screwed up. She's let herself feel for someone else. And she's now no longer protected by this emotionally numb facade. She's now real. That's kind of what my feeling was.
It was interesting because I very much got the idea of the dreamlike quality at the beginning, and you say these long shots where she's moving through the house and carrying the buckets and so on is extraordinarily effective. You talked about when you got into the editing suite. You worked with an editor, is that correct?
Yeah, I had a great editor called Aggie. She was great. I really originally, before I brought her on board, I wanted a female editor because I wanted it, because I was so concerned about it not being exploitive or titillative. I wanted a female aspect. I always wanted a female there to look at it from female eyes. And so I spoke to Aggie, and she had great ideas anyway about script, but it was always in the background of my mind that I wanted a female editor. And it was her that was saying, make it more brutal. No, we really need to see what these girls go through. Keep that in, keep that in. I was like, really? That's really pushing it. People need to see what goes on with these, poor girls. So, but we were always very much wanting to always be tasteful. That was the whole thing. Is I didn't want nudity, because one of the reasons I didn't want nudity is because I didn't want it to be titillating, and I kind of felt rape is nothing but an act of violence. It's not a sex scene. It's a horrible, brutal act of aggression, control, and violence. And I always wanted it just to be seen as that. And that's the main reason we didn't go for nudity, and I shot it as horribly as possible. But yeah, Aggie was brilliant, and we spent a lot of time editing it. I think we spent about 10 weeks editing it, and we would have gone on longer, but Fright Fest, lovely Alan Jones said, I love it. He goes, if you can get it ready for Fright Fest, we'll give you opening film. So if there was ever a sort of encouragement to get this thing finished, it went from, sitting back and trying things to, oh my goodness, we haven't even finished editing this, and we've got to do all the visual effects, we've got to do sound design, we've got to do music. And so literally, as soon as he said that, I think we really went for it, and I think it was ready 2 days before screening at Fright Fest. So
really?
no pressure.
That is close, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of scary, because last week everything was starting to come together, and then it all came together, and it was like, looked at it, yeah, it's fine, because we really didn't want to give them anything that wasn't finished. So, and Fright Fest were wonderful. They really supported us so well, and it was really thanks to Fright Fest that the film got such a big audience.
It's I unfortunately I wasn't there, but I remember the reaction at the time and how popular it was. Okay, now we're coming up for 25 too, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the call out, and just to confirm, I know Damon, I think, is going to come and join us. If there's anybody else out there who would like to come and join us live to have a chat with Paul and ask your questions live to Paul, I've got some lined up. Please let me know. Craig will pass that on to me, and then in about 5 minutes or so I'll start issuing some invitations to those. This question actually is just before we move on to Howl, particularly because this is mostly what people are asking you about. You got the editing, you had that female perspective, which I was talking about. I think it took you a while to find Rosie, is that right?
Yeah. We looked through about 130 girls, and it was in the last 10 that we found Rosie. And we saw lots of great actresses, but not who I really, when someone walks in and you think, oh, this is it. And I think we looked through about 120 girls and not found her. So it was kind of a bit worrying, And then Rosie came in, and I looked at her and I thought, oh my God, she looks perfect. Everything, the physicality, the face, the eyes, the hair, everything was what I'd imagined Angel to be. I remember thinking, please let her be able to act, please. And she came in, and if you ever meet Rosie, she's got great big eyes, really expressionful eyes. She's like this little bundle of energy, and but she had this amazing knack of, you call action, it was like everything turned off. The glint in her eyes turned off. Everything physicality wise, it was completely amazing to watch. And she nailed her audition. It was brilliant. And the producer wasn't there the first time, so we got him in again to show the producer, and he was like, yeah, this girl is great. So, it was kind of interesting, because Rosie, she was so brilliant in the audition, and then we went off and prepped the movie, and then there was Christmas break, and then we got back onto the actual shoot, and Rosie came bounding on set all happy. I'd forgotten about her brilliant technique of just being able to turn off And I remember thinking, oh, she's so happy, and you know, we're making this dour film, and then we call action, and you know, suddenly she just, again, she lost that glint in her eyes, and she just turned into Angel, and it was an amazing thing to see.
What you're talking about the audition process? How did you had you given her script to look at before the audition, or was she just coming in doing a reading for you, or just a prepared piece?
I can't remember if we gave scripts out. I think we gave scripts out. I'm sure we did. And then I prepared 3 scenes, which obviously she doesn't talk. So everything was about, okay, you know, imagine there's a threat in the room, and I would talk through someone's walking behind you. So she never knew what I was going to say. Maybe like, you know, someone's walking behind you, walking to your left, leaving the room, you know, relief. Then you can hear them coming back with another person coming, and to see the sort of tension and the fear. And we'd try that, and then we would try to completely emotionally numb, and having to inject someone and the sign language. So there's all these different ways of auditioning someone without any words, which was kind of quite difficult. But you know, she nailed it all, and you know, thank God we did it like that, because it was all about, if you overexpress your face, you look like it's too much, and you look too over animated. If you don't do enough, then you look wooden. So it's a very hard, you know, line to be able to, you know how much on camera you're expressing what you're feeling. And you know, I'd read somewhere that, you know, if you've got no words as an actor, you're thinking it, or you know, how you prepare yourself and how you do it on camera, that, you know, you're always inside, how much you have to internalize that you're actually having this conversation inside. So there's a lot we worked on, and a lot of these girls, it's amazing, a lot of the girls got it, but it was really Rosie that was able to do so much of her face, but it not look overdone. It didn't look too animated, and you know, it's that whole thing. It didn't look like she was gurning. You know, it'd either be like gurning or it'd be wooden. And Rosie got it perfect. She absolutely nailed it. And yeah, it could, you know, if we hadn't got Rosie, it would have been interesting to see how it all worked. So I just see it as one of those lucky fate things.
It was fascinating because I was watching, as I say, I've watched in the reverse order, because I saw Howl and then watched Seasoning House. And obviously Rosie is also in Howl, which we'll move on to now. I was just amazed at the difference. I was thinking, really, that's the same actress? I'm not. It wasn't until I was watching the kind of the behind the scenes featurette, I thought, oh yeah, that bright, funny, laughing girl between takes, that looks more like the girl that I'm watching in Howl. Quite an amazing girl. So I'm just double checking who else is going to come. I believe it's just going to be Damon who's coming on. Oh, okay, Derek. Okay, right. I'm just going to invite a couple of people on whilst I'm doing that. I have a question for you from Zach. It's about, how do you take on reviews' critiques of The Howling? Many a critic may be as redundant and as boring as the rest and not get what you are trying to achieve. So I think this is one of the, you know, for all filmmakers, for all actors and so on, how do you deal with the critics? The movie's out there now. There's nothing else you can do about it. How do you deal with the reviews for a piece of work, for not just for Howl, for Seasoning House, etc.? How do you approach critics?
I mean, it's one of those things where everyone has their opinion, and you know, the really constructive ones are the ones that you read, even if they're critical, and you read it. If they're constructive, and you know, you read a critique and you say, yeah, I understand what they're thinking, and yeah, you know, you take it all on board. With Seasoning House, you know, we went through having so many great reviews, and then some people would either love it and some people would hate it. And you know, I always feel if you get all bad reviews, that's really bad. If you get a lot of excellent reviews and a lot of bad reviews, that's kind of good, because you've had an effect on people. That some people are going to love it and some people are going to hate it. You know, some people with Seasoning House say, I absolutely love that film. It stayed with me for days. I absolutely adore it. What you did with it, I love it, and you get all happy, and then you hear someone saying, "I hated that film." I watched it and I absolutely hated it, and it stayed with me for days, and I had nightmares, and it's horrible. So you think, okay, then I kind of had a good effect on them as well. And some people would just be, the only thing with Season House is sometimes you've got people saying, "Oh, it's exploitive," and these poor girls, and making a horrible rape film. And you think, well, you didn't get the film that I had in my head. You didn't see it how I see it, and some people just go see rape films and hate it. And I think like with Howl's come out, and I've read about 20 reviews, and most of them, I think about 18, have been very positive. So I'm really happy with that. And reviews are reviews, and you've always got to have a thick skin. And if everyone hates your movie, then I think that's a bad thing. If there's a lot of people that like it, don't like it, some people say, I like the movie, but I don't like this, or I didn't like the characters, and so there's a lot of things you can never take it personally. And a friend of mine said, just don't read the bad ones. And he's got a good point. He says read the bad ones a year later or stuff. But everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a right to an opinion. Everyone, like me, I watch movies and go, oh, that was a great movie, or that was a great movie. Everyone has an opinion. You can't get hung up, and you can't take it to heart, and you just got to enjoy the good ones.
Yeah, I think when I remember before I went to drama school, I came across a quote, you're never as good, you're never as bad as they say you are. You've got to take everything with a huge pinch of salt. And I think, as you say, it's if people are being constructive, they're saying, this is why I didn't like this bit, then you've got something. But you say, I didn't, it's this, it's that, and just slag it off. We're joined by Derek. Hi, Derek.
Hello.
Hello, Derek.
Hiya.
How you doing?
Getting there.
What's your question for Paul, Derek?
Bit of a double-barreled one, if that's okay. The first part of it is, you were mentioning about getting critics and everything like that. Do you find now that you're making your own movies that you are personally your own worst critic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm never happy with, like with Season House. I look at it and I think about all the things that I wish I'd done, and with how, right up until the UK Fright Fest, I was really nervous because we had just pretty much finished it. So I'm thinking about you always over obsess on all the stuff that you wish you'd done a different way, or you wish you'd done this, wish you'd done that. So you're always kind of nervous. You're never happy. You're never 100% happy. And but hindsight's a wonderful thing. When you're on set and everyone's standing around you, and you've only got 2 hours to finish a scene, and you wish you'd done the lighting like this, or you'd used a different angle, or you wish you'd worked through something a bit more. There's always something. I wish I'd done another week of editing. I wish I'd spent a bit more time on the sound design. There's always something, but there's a point once it's come out, and once a little bit of time has passed, that's when you get much more comfortable with it, and you think, oh, actually, it is what it is, and I'm kind of happy with it. But especially as soon as you've made it, and as soon as you've finished it, you absolutely obsess about all the things you wish you'd done. So, but I think everyone does that, really.
Yeah, that's true. The other part of the question was, now that with social media and everything being the way it is, and constantly growing, expanding, and everyone's got their own opinions and stuff, have you found that makes it a slight bit harder when you're making your own movies, with the fact that every single person not only has the opinion in their head, but the ability to express that opinion everywhere?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think you could do a film that the critics don't like, but the online critics and the general people and the viewers may absolutely adore. So that can be helpful. It can be unhelpful if you're making a movie and someone posts loads of things that they don't like about the movie, and you think, well, I think I don't think it makes it harder. I think everyone has an opinion, and the social media is the world we live in. And I think that's part of the beauty about it, is giving everyone a chance to voice their opinions and feelings. And like I said, if it's constructive, then it's all brilliant. I think there's certain people that sort of maybe post things, but to be honest with you, I think generally it's a good thing because opening your movie up to as many people as possible to be able to say whatever they want online, I think can only help your movie, can only bolster it. And you'd rather have 50 people commenting on your movie than just a handful of critics. I think some people will read the critics' reviews and go, something, I want to see what lots of young horror fans think about it. And, the horror community could give you a thumbs up where critics may not. And I think sometimes, having all of that knowledge and all of those opinions to hand, you can kind of pick and choose whose opinion you want to take on board, whether it is the hardcore fans, the people that kind of like this type of movie, or the critics. I think it's only a positive thing to have as many people as possible, commenting on your film.
Definitely. I mean, it's the main issue is with critics is they seem to be quite stuck in their ways when it comes to certain things. And the good thing about having your fans or just anyone being able to say anything now is, they can say anything. They're not set in their ways. They are just the public. So it's like
you may just want to see what 50, 20-year-olds, that love horror films that aren't going to be so critical. You might just want to sort of get a feeling of if they like it, and I think a cross section of people always helps.
Mm-hmm. There's one thing I was wanting to ask you, because obviously you said that you had written The Seasoning House, but I believe that Howl is different. This was a script that was already in existence when you were asked to do it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. The Seasoning House, I wrote with a couple of other people. With Howl, Nick Ostler and Mark Huckabee, they wrote Howl, and it was there was a script that existed, and it had been around for a couple of years. And the producers, Ed King and Martin Gentles, they'd watched The Seasoning House at Fright Fest and said, "We think you'll be a good fit for Howl." And they liked the tension and claustrophobia, so they gave me a script to Howl. And originally it had a lot more comedy in. It was a lot more slapstick and a lot more sort of humorous dialogue. So I kind of did a pass on it, and I worked with the writers to try to get it a little bit more grounded and real. I think they've done lots of different drafts for different people, trying to, doing a scarier one, doing a more funny one, doing this. And I kind of felt, as most directors, they come along and they do a director's pass. And so I did my director's pass, and it was really just to try to make it. It was hard because I wanted it to be a humorous movie. I wanted there to be a dark humor and it to be fun, but also I wanted to have moments of tension and scariness. And whenever you're putting humour into a horror film, it's always hard. It's always difficult because if it's over-egged or forced humour, that will come across. So it was very much always trying to give the humour out of situations and how people to react, rather than specific slapstick or funny one-liners. It was always, it was challenging to find that right balance. But people responded really well to the humour in it, which was one of the things that I was really worried about. But like Fright Fest, everyone laughed at the right moments. But yeah, it was interesting working with a couple of other writers. But both Mark and Nick, they were so open and they weren't precious. They were like, we want this to be your movie as well as ours, so let's keep working on it. So he worked on it for a while, and yeah, it was just as gratifying doing that as my own script.
I'd just like to share a comment with you from Steph Andruzak. Howl was lots of fun. I like that there was a mix of older, middle-aged, and younger characters, and Doug from Emmerdale. And that was one of the things I did find fascinating, is that were they there from the very beginning? Was it always this range of characters who were stuck in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. All those characters that are in there are exactly the characters that are on the page when I first got the script. I love the idea that we had a couple of old people, that we had a couple of middle-aged. There was such a lovely cross-section of characters because, the beauty of it is that everyone reacts a different way in an emergency. And it was just great fun to have all these characters that are all so different. I mean, I know personally in any form of emergency, I'd be totally useless. Um, so it was really nice to be able to play with all those characters. I was really lucky to get a really good cast. Everyone from Sean Pertwee, Sean McDonald, Elliot Cowan, Rosie Day. Everybody was great. They really brought so much to their characters and had great ideas about their characters. So it was great to speak to them all about how they would react. And if it was for teenagers, then it'd be a lot more dull because they'd be all so alike. So it's always that was one of the things that really appealed to me about the script was this lovely cross section of characters all going to react in the most different way.
I think one of the real strengths of the movie, that you do have that. And you filmed this in South London, is that right?
Yeah, we shot it in a warehouse in Croydon.
I wish I'd known you're just down the road from me. Um,
Ah.
um, now, in terms of the werewolf, in fact, this question comes back from Derek, I think. What were your big influences in terms of the design of the werewolf? And Derek asked earlier on, have you ever seen The Company of Wolves?
Something with designing these creatures, there wasn't one particular sort of source I looked to. I knew I didn't want big furry creatures with big snouts because I felt with all the creatures and with all the characters in the cast, they were all really well defined, all different. I wanted the creatures to have personality as well, and that's why I wanted them sort of kind of quite human-ish. I kind of felt I wanted a kind of feeling of these creatures live in the woods, they're feral, and what kind of worked for me was because I took away the mythology of silver bullets, full moon, that sort of thing. I wanted them to be rather than these beautifully manicured and creatures that sometimes their fur is so perfect, it looks fluffy and beautiful. I wanted gnarly, ugly, feral kind of creatures that live in the forest and just big, ugly, nasty. When we were designing it, I was just like bigger, uglier, horrible, twisted features. And I think my feeling was, you get bit, the virus starts going through your veins, and it probably takes 30 years to transform. It's not the full moon transforms you. It's that all your bones start breaking and reforming, and the muscle splits and rejoins, and that takes years and years and years, as well as living outside, killing deer, and mange ridden and fleas, and But it was just that whole thing of I really wanted them to have a good personality rather than full creatures that all look the same. I wanted them to have a real sort of, there's a bit of orc-like in there, there's a bit of wrong turn, there's a bit of, there was so many different bits and bobs in there that I don't think there was one particular, it looks like the creatures from X or X. Well, I wanted them looking kind of quiet on their own, and I can't remember if there's been creatures with, glowing eyes and triple jointed legs. I kind of like to think they have their own kind of personality.
It's one of the things I really liked about it was the fact that they didn't walk like a man who's been transformed. They looked like a creature. They looked, there was that thing of the wolf about them. I did ask the question when we were at Fright Fest about how long it took to get into the makeup. And you were saying you tried to keep it down below 3 hours, is that right?
I think the longest creature makeup on Hal was 2 hours. It was a suit, a face piece, a wig piece. I've always wanted, in my prosthetics career, I've always wanted to try and keep makeups down wherever I could, just because it's tiring for the artist, it's tiring for the cast. And some people design makeups that take forever, and the actors would go in a bit tired, and they just had 5 or 6 hours of makeup, and they've got to find their second wind. And I always feel, if you can, sometimes you've got no choice, but if you can, with the amount of work that those guys have to go on, once you've done your makeup, you just stand by and watch and maintain. but those actors have to go on stage and they have to then come to life, and that's when their work begins. So timing them out beforehand is always, I've always tried to be, and we're really lucky with Christian. He designed everything to be kind of quite quick. I think it took 45 minutes to put on the suit and about an hour to do the face. So I think it was always about 2 hours, because the legs are all CG. So I'm pretty sure it never really went over.
And the Christian you're referring to is Christian Mallet. And I think, how difficult for you is it now, this is your second movie, to give up the hands-on when you see the makeup, that you're now directing, and you say you don't have a studio anymore, you're really just concentrating on your directing. How hard is it just to stand back and say, no, they know what they're doing, and just let them get on with it?
On the season house, I was probably a little bit too finicky. I was like, oh, give me the makeup brush, let me have a go and do it. So I was kind of all over it then. But I think of Howl, technically Howl was a much, much more challenging film than Season House. I had 9 actors on a thin metal tube of a set and tons of visual effects. I think we had 370 visual effects shots in the end. So there was so much for me to do with blocking the scene with 9 actors, working out camera-wise, how do I make this look visually interesting? Because shooting on the same set, you're always trying to think, how can I make this look interesting? Have I used that shot? Am I doing Steadicam? So it was a constant challenge to make it look visually interesting, work with all those actors, work with my DP, trying to work everything out. That the prosthetics, I actually was really happy just to say to Christian, because once everything was designed, it's up to Christian just to build it and then come on set with it. So during on set, I wasn't involved in, helping to colour. It was literally, they would bring it on set, I'd look at it and go, that's great, Christian, wonderful. Right, what I need for you is to do this, 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 and this. So it really, it was very easy for me on this, especially on this particular one, to just give everything over to Christian. Once I had a lot of work in the designing, I photoshopped the eyes and designed the teeth myself, and then worked with a 3D artist to come up with a 3D sculpting rendering on digital ZBrush. So we worked a lot to work out the designs. Then I gave it to Christian, and then said to Christian, I don't want you to feel this is it, let's work on talking about stuff to make it even more cool and crazy. Because I never really want to give an artist, this is it exactly, just make that. I want them to have, to bring their own artistry and their own thoughts to it. So Christian brought a lot to that as well. And I'd look at pictures and sculpts and say, well, maybe try this, maybe try that, add a bit of this, take away that. But then there's a point where I said, right, everything is designed. And the rest of it was purely up to Christian to build.
Oh, interesting. I think, because I was going to ask you about the design process and so on. Do you physically sketch stuff? And you say you were working with a 3D artist on this. Did you hand him physical sketches? I presume you must sketch.
Yeah, we had all that, but a lot of it was, me and this 3D artist. We would sit at his table, and a lot of it was, I'd bring loads of images of everything from creatures to humans to everything that I had kind of put together, little photoshops that I did myself. I don't call myself a brilliant Photoshop artist, but I can kind of do a little bit, but then I would show him, and he said, oh, I get what you mean, you want this and you want that, and then he would work, and we would work together for days on end, and then I'd go home, do something else, and then bring that, and he'd go, oh, I see what you've done, you've done this to it, you've done that to it. So it's very collaborative. In my head, I kind of knew what I wanted, but once you start seeing it as a 3D digital form, then you start thinking, oh, actually, you know what would be cool is do this and do that, and everything in filmmaking is organic. I do loads of storyboards, and then I get them and change it on the day, because, you kind of think of all these other cool things to do. So, it was a very collaborative process, and something that wasn't purely me at all. It was everything really in Howl was very, very collaborative. And that's kind of, I feel, the best way to work is there's so many people from cast to prosthetics to makeup to costume to production design to editing. Everyone is an expert in their field, and they have these great skills. And I always learn from other directors: don't try to suppress that. Don't try to be this all-seeing know-it-all. It's about bringing out all of other people's skills and talents. You're like you're a conductor to an orchestra. You don't, you just gently guide, and you let people do what they do, and let them do it well. That's one of the things that I always learn. If I had a director telling me in my prosthetics career, this is exactly what I want, I don't want to know your opinion on it, which has happened a couple of times. You don't get the best out of that person. So it's all about, a lot of times I'd say, this is kind of what I feel. What do you think? And then they put their opinion in. You think, yeah, that's cool. Why don't you do a bit of that and a bit of what I'm talking about and mix it and match it? And, it's all about a collaboration, an amalgamation of talents. I think, I've got my job, they've all got those jobs, and we all put everything together and hopefully get something really good out of it.
That's brilliant. I love the image of the idea of the director being a conductor, if you like. He stands there at the front waving the baton, but he's guiding, not controlling. Is what I guess you mean. One last question before I think we should start wrapping this up. Just going back to Seasoning House, particularly, the music in Seasoning House was incredibly effective. How did you get to work with, and I've forgotten the name now, and it's Paul Francis, that composer?
He was brilliant, and he did the soundtrack to Howl as well. I think I was recommended him to me by the producer, Mike. I think either Mike knew him or knew someone that knew him. And with Paul, we just sat there and we talked about all the movie soundtracks we liked. And he's a really young guy. I think he's kind of younger than me. He's like in his early. He'd probably hate me for saying this because he might be late 20s, but he's a young guy, and never asked him his age. But he's a young guy. But he was so knowledgeable about. We talked about everything from Bernard Herrmann to Hans Zimmer to, we talked about all of our favourite soundtracks, John Carpenter, and, one of his ideas was, let's use real Balkan instruments in this. And I was like, that's brilliant. So I said to him that the music is so important in Season House because there's hardly any dialogue. And we need to really get into that mood, and it needs to be nihilistic and bleak and have these moments of happiness. And, we talked about Angel having a particular theme when she's on screen, in terms of when she has her friendship, there'd be certain like sort of motifs and riffs that would come in and give you little bits of hope. And it was just, he's brilliant. How he puts things together is brilliant. And it was one of the really big fun parts was working with Paul and trying to work out where to go with the music, and but it was always the idea just to give it a foreign feel, rather than your standard. Horror films sometimes have very off-the-shelf type soundtracks, but me and Paul wanted to do something that was very, very different. With Howl, it was a little bit more, studio soundtrack kind of. It was a little bit more. To what you'd expect in a horror movie. But Season House was something that we worked to have a very Balkan-esque feel to it. And it's one of the bits that I love most about Season House is the music. I think works really well.
One of the things I particularly liked about it, there's a very militaristic sound to it. The rhythms sound like marching songs in some, and because this whole situation is right in the middle of a war zone, and you've got the militia guys coming back at the end. And one of the reasons I was particularly impressed with it was because it does have that military feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really. It's one of the things that a lot of people mention is the music. I think a lot of people realise that like the music so much because there's no talking. So you are just the thing that immerses you is this music. So it was really lucky, and Paul done a stand-up job on how he completely. Both me and Paul, we were like different movies to Season House in terms of visuals, sound design, music. And a lot of people say it's kind of hard to tell that it's directed by the same person, but I always feel every film has its own look, every film has its own music, every film should have a different tone, a different feel. And I can never understand directors that want to do the same look, the same sort of, tricks each time. I can never kind of quite, because I always feel as an artist, you always want to do something different with everything you do, just because you want to, explore all the different sort of technologies, looks, emotions of characters, emotions of visuals and music. There's so many different ways you can do something. So yeah, no, but getting back to music, I was really lucky.
Yeah, no, and as you say, absolutely vital part of it. So people can find out more about Howl via the Facebook page. I presume there's a website for Howl?
There's a website. I think there's a views up for Howl now. IMDb's got a bunch of views, and yeah, we're slowly kind of getting it out there. And I think this week all the main reviews from the critics will come out. So fingers crossed. There, but yeah, it's kind of out there. So hopefully, if everyone can kind of, go watch it or come to Prince Charles and meet me and join in the Q&A, and it comes out on Blu-ray and DVD on the 26th. But hopefully,
Okay.
a lot of people prefer it because it's much more fun and happy than Season House.
Yeah, it's as you say, it's a very, very different movie to the Seasoning House. Paul, thank you very much indeed for spending time. This has been great, being really insightful into the way you make your movies and so on. Thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us. Derek, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you to everybody else who's been asking questions throughout. And just as I'm winding up, I knew this was going to happen. It's always the way. There is one person who, bear with me if you've got time, I'm going to try inviting a gentleman on again. A gentleman called Damon Rickard, who's another filmmaker, has a question for you. And hopefully he's going to be on in the next few moments. The world is waiting for Damon. I know he's been trying to get on for the last half hour. If not, then it doesn't appear that he's going to be coming to join us. Whilst we're just waiting for Damon, I will carry on the wrap up just to say, yes, just to remind everybody that it's going to be out on DVD. Sorry, it's in the cinemas on the 16th of October in the UK. Do you have a US release date for it?
Yes. I know it's definitely coming out in January now from Alchemy. So as far as I know, I think it's January, maybe 16th as well, but definitely comes out in the US in January.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, while I'm waiting for Damon, just say that Howl is a very different movie to my last one. It's much more of a fun sort of roller coaster sort of ride, tense and funny, and it was something that after Season House I was very much wanting to do something so different from Season House. I think as much as I love Season House, I just wanted to do something that didn't have any kind of responsibility attached to it. That it was a reflection on society and what was going on, and for everyone that kind of sort of said Season House was a dark, bleak, nihilistic movie, I kind of felt it was very important to do a film that was fun, exciting, that was completely different. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at how different it is.
Yes, I think one of the things I really like, which we touched on earlier on, it's the characters. That you've got the characters in a very claustrophobic space as well. But I think one of the real strengths about Howl as a movie is that you do have, and what's kind of interesting, this came out in some of the notes behind, that you've got a beta male rather than an alpha male as your lead. That he's not your average expected hero. beautifully played by Ed Spilliers, by the way. I thought he really nailed that character.
Yeah, we really wanted him as this sort of, beta male, and you got Adrian, who's this alpha male, and with Ed, we always said, there's a jealousy. He always wanted to be the alpha male, and he's just ended up in a sort of dead end job and not quite sure what to do with his life. And the whole film is his character arc into eventually he gets his wish to turn into a alpha male. We won't say how, but it's a nice sort of character journey. But it's that whole thing of all the way through the film. There's and that was one of the main reasons I did it. Was these characters were so much good fun. You had the alpha male, you had the sort of cowardly one, the manipulative one, and a lot of it was lovely to get all these characters into a situation. You're on this train with all these different people that you travel with every day. It breaks down in the middle of nowhere in this forest, and you just think, okay, what more can happen now? What's the worst thing that could happen? Werewolves attack. And how do they react to all these werewolves rampaging onto a train? And some people are just idiots. Some people are actually stand up to the challenge. Most people panic. And I think the main strength of the movie is getting in there and identifying and enjoying how all these characters sort of react to this threat of these werewolves attacking.
And one of the reasons I really loved it as well is because when I was probably about 13 years old, something like that, I used to go to school via train in West Sussex, and the journey was about 15 minutes, but one night the train broke down and it took 3 hours, and it was the middle of winter. And it was snowing out. It was snowed out. There's snow on the ground outside, and literally the only light outside was because there was no power on the train, and it was absolutely packed as well. It was literally just moonlight, and I thought, yeah, I've been on this kind of journey. I think that's one of the great strengths of the movie is that you've been, so many of us have been on that last train home at night.
Well, that's what happened with the writers. That's where the idea comes from. They were on a train, and this is about 10 years ago, and it broke down. And they were thinking, oh, this is a nightmare. But it was it was night time, and there's only a few of them on the train. And they thought, what is the worst thing that could happen? And that's where the idea came from. And obviously, it resonates with someone like yourself who's had a traumatic childhood train breaking down journey in the winter. Yeah. But it was one of those things where, how do you react? And I know personally, I would be terrible in any sense of an emergency. So, it was a really fun thing to kind of do and to play with these characters. And the cast, they all were great. They all had ideas of what they wanted to do and how they would react and how their character would react. So it was just a really good kind of fun, sort of script to do.
Yeah, very different. Right, we just heard from Damon. And thank you very much indeed for talking on Paul. Just heard from Damon. He's just not having any technical luck, so he says he'll ask you himself.
Okay.
Whatever the question is. Paul, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you to everybody else. Check out Howl. It's going to be limited release 16th of October. It's at the Prince Charles on the 18th of October at London's Leicester Square. It's out on Blu-ray and DVD on the 26th of October in the United Kingdom, and it's going to be in mid-January next year in the USA. I really do recommend this movie. This has been Chattering with Nicholas Vince. I've been chattering with Paul Hyatt. Thank you to everybody who's been watching, and good night. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.